I'm Andrew Quinn, the Daily Record's Westminster reporter, and I'm joined today by Chris Stephens, SNP MP for Glasgow South West. It's just after Prime Minister's questions here in Westminster. So, Chris, how did it go? What happened in PMQs?
Well, I think what is fascinating sometimes when you're here is that you sometimes do think that you are in an absolute other country. PMQs, exchanges between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak were really dominated by anti-immigration rhetoric. A whole debate which seems to pass me by a wee bit in terms of it's not the number one issue. The number one issue is the cost of living, and there was only, in that particular exchange, there was only one passing reference to the cost of living, and I think that's what the public out there are more interested in, is how political parties are going to address the cost of living challenges. Then we had Stephen, who I think is making the very fair point that there seems to be very little difference between the Conservatives and the Labour Party's economic policies. Certainly that's in the back of Rachel Reeves' big speech last night, and comments from David Lammy, who referred to, Margaret Thatcher, and a favourable view of Margaret Thatcher, which I don't think will be shared by many people in Scotland, nor indeed in many of the traditional Labour heartlands in England. So we had that. I thought that Rishi Sunak's answer to Stephen's question, talking about Birmingham, was quite a bizarre answer, given that what has happened in Birmingham City Council is that it's been the UK government and Michael Gove who's forced Birmingham City Council to ramp up council tax by 21% and at the same time impose cuts. And you've seen that in other places in England, like Nottingham as well. So it's a far different situation to what's happening in Scotland. There was some good questions from colleagues on Gaza and Palestine, a very real issue, and many constituents write to me about their concerns about the starvation that's now happening in Gaza and the need for aid to get in. That's in the back of an urgent question yesterday. Hannah Burdell asked, I think, a very good question about her constituents who are in buildings which contain RAC. And I don't think the Prime Minister answered that effectively at all, because there are real questions that Hannah's rightly raised about mortgages, people trying to get remortgages in those situations, and all issues that actually are decided here. So I don't think that was a satisfactory answer, but I think it was a very good point that Hannah raised on behalf of our Livingston constituents.
And Rachel Reeves didn't seem too happy about the Thatcherism comments and that. She was shouting out, is that right?
Well, I understand she did. I was a bit further away in the chamber, but it certainly got a reaction. That tells me how effective the attack was. I think there's a very real sense that the Labour Party is making similar mistakes than they did in the lead up to the 2015 election, and that they are making an economic offer which is not that much different, if anything, from the Conservative Party. The fact that they're willing to abide by the Tory fiscal rules, but also the cuts to public services. Stephen, I think, referenced, fairly, to the Institute of Physical Studies report, which says that both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have a conspiracy of silence when it comes to these sorts of cuts. My view, of course, as you know, Andrew, is that I think we need public investment rather than cuts, and that's the only way that we're going to help people with the cost of living and improve the economy.
And Starmer also made a call for an election. He was having a bit of a go at Rishi Sunak, saying he was scared. What did you think of that? Do you think we need to have an election now?
Well, I think, the whole serious point behind this is that this Parliament is not a fixed Parliament. If you remember the Scottish Parliament or a councillor, you know when the next election is because the date is set, because it's fixed term. And this could all have been avoided had the Conservatives not scrapped the Fixed Term Parliament Act. I think it probably is now time for a general election. I think there was a case to have a general election after COVID because the situation had changed. There was a clear case for having a general election when the Tories crashed the economy at the tail end of 2022. You do think that the current Prime Minister has ran out of road, and it'll be interesting to see if he survives in the next couple of weeks. We hear things, I'm sure you've heard things, Andrew, as well, as to what that means. whether the Conservative Party is trying to dump him and replace him with someone else. If they were to do that, there has to be an immediate general election. So I think the quicker the better, because I think that it's now time for, I think, some honesty in politics and political parties now outlining how they view the future, how they view us tackling that cost of living crisis, tackling the economy, and certainly for the people of Scotland, what our relationship is, if any, in this United Kingdom.
And how do you think the SNP would get on at the general election?
Well, I think we'd go on far better than the polls are saying, but what's interesting about all the polling numbers at the moment, there's a large number of undecideds. So when you look at a top line figure in a poll, it's skewed because the number of undecideds is taken out the polls. I always thought that they'd done some sort of scientific analysis around that, but they haven't. I think there's a lot of people whose votes are up for grabs, and we will certainly be trying to maximise our vote. Certainly I'm finding a very good reaction in Glasgow South West and the doorsteps when we're out, but they know my record in cost of living, the fact that we're reaching out with a community shop network so that food's affordable. You know my work around the food poverty strategy bill, you know my record on workers' rights, and the constituency work we're doing. I think that I've got a fantastic team in my office staff, and I think that the constituents know that.
And so do you think, with the SNP saying we would like more public investment, do you think that can kind of win voters over?
No,
I might have been thinking of going later.
Well, why would say, I think we have a strong record in arguing at Westminster elections it's time to end austerity, and the austerity project has failed. Living standards are now the highest they've been since the 1950s. Wages in real terms are the lowest since 1975. There really needs to be, I think, a radical alternative to the two main parties at Westminster, and I think that we provide that in Scotland. And interestingly, what you're starting to see in England develop is a number of left parties or left independent candidates are starting to emerge. So I think it's going to be an interesting election.
Yeah, and how do you think things will be for the left in general? Obviously, the Labour left are kind of, it's difficult for them at the moment to have a voice. Do you think there will be a good socialist voice in Parliament after the next election?
Certainly hope so, and it certainly needs one. It'd be pretty boring if it wasn't. So I think that we need left alternatives in this place to the two main parties, because I'm actually quite shocked that having an austerity programme that's failed on the back of 14 years of cuts, that you have two main parties who want to cut even more. I don't see that as a sustainable project.